So controlling properties for as little as £1 almost sounds too good to be true, right? And maybe you've heard about the notion of profiting from a property without actually buying it as well. And you're probably thinking, that just sounds too good to be true as well. Well, actually, this kind of stuff does work. And this is where lease options is a common property strategy that, if utilized correctly, can potentially be an amazing skill set to have in your back pocket. Now, I'm obviously conscious of the people who watch these videos, and some of you may have started with very little experience in property. So I'm going to try and give you a basic understanding of this, but what I do want you to know is that if ever you do manage to negotiate yourself a lease option deal, then please do seek professional legal advice, especially in terms of drawing out that actual contract. Because the main thing I want you to do is mitigate any risk for yourself and, of course, the potential vendor. So before we run into the intro, let's all roll back our sleeves, let's crack our fingers, and if you don't mind, let's smash the hell out of that like button. And if you're already there and you're new to this channel, then maybe consider subscribing too. So let's jump into it. What's going on, everyone? My name is Aaron, aka The Anxious Investor, and I'm back with another video to help you learn stuff about property for absolutely free, so you can save yourself the money, not make the same mistakes as I made. Trust me, I've made a fair few, and go out there and invest in property to hopefully change your life. So let's jump straight into lease options and explain what this means and how we can potentially do it along with an example. So to begin with, what I want to do is have you thinking about lease options as almost two separate things that are more effective when put together. The lease part, as you may know, is slightly similar to maybe having a car on lease where you're responsible for monthly payments. And in property terms, for example, subject to the agreement, you'll be responsible for things like the mortgage. But I'll run through an example on that a little bit later on. Now, the option part, which in my opinion is definitely the best part of a lease option agreement, is where you have the option or the choice to buy the property at an agreed fee at a later date, should you wish to. And that's the key here. There is actually no obligation for you to do so, and instead it's something that you can decide much closer to the end of that agreement date on whether you actually want to buy it or not. Now, don't worry if this sounds a little confusing as we're going on. The example will explain it in a little bit more detail as we go through this video, and by the time this video is up, I promise you'll have a great understanding of lease options. Or at least I hope so. Now, an important point to note is when you do a lease option, there are going to be some costs involved. So it's not one of those dodgy, no money down strategies, but it's definitely a strategy that, if done right, takes a lot less time in terms of the acquisition of a property and costs potentially a lot less as well, especially when you start it. And the costs associated with this would include your legal agreements that need to be drawn up, which would require you to initially put some money down, and obviously any upfront payments as well. And this is where investors often say that you can buy a property for as little as £1, and you've probably seen those adverts flying around. Now, technically, you can control a property for as little as £1 with the legal agreement in place, but you can't technically buy it for that amount. Although there are many ways that you can move this on later on, which I'll explain at the end of this video. So alongside the legals, you may also have some upfront costs as well that you're obliged to kind of look after, if that's the right terminology. And I think now is probably a good time to run through an example so we can really flesh this out to give you a better understanding. So I'm completely making this up and I'm just thinking of this on the spot. So let's imagine we have Bruno who wants to sell his house for some reason. And as you know, there's thousands of reasons why you want to sell a house. Relocation, divorce, downsizing, for example. But let's just say he's moving in with his new lady friend, and there's no point having a mortgage hanging over his head on a monthly basis when they're living in the same house. But he's also stuck with selling this house because when he initially bought it, it was worth £100,000 and he had a £50,000 mortgage on it, i.e. he put £50,000 down as a deposit. But now, due to the economy, COVID, or just the area itself, it's sadly worth £80,000. So as a result of this, he knows that if he was to pay off the mortgage of £50,000, i.e. sell it, he would walk away with only £30,000 rather than the initial 50k that he put in. Now, this doesn't sit well with him, as I'm sure it wouldn't sit well with you, and it definitely wouldn't sit well with me. And at the very least, he knows he needs £100,000 to kind of break even, as he's now ready to move on with his life. Now, if you went in and offered him 80,000, he would likely reject it straight away. However, if you offered him 100,000, you may have a problem with getting yourself the valuation that you want, especially now, causing you to instantly lose money. So it's a no-brainer for you. But here is where a lease option could potentially work. You could propose something along the lines to Bruno that maybe you will now manage the property via the lease and take over all of the mortgage payments whilst he lives with his lady friend. And a quick note here, the name on the mortgage won't change, it will still be under Bruno's name. And you can then potentially either rent this out to a single family, maybe making more than what the current mortgage payments are and cash flowing off the top, or you could potentially let each room out individually and HMO it, making yourselves maybe a little bit more money. Now, alongside this, you could also say to Bruno, who obviously wants his £100,000, that I don't have the money quite yet, but in the next 7 years, what I'll do is I'll take over all the expenses for your house so you haven't got to worry about it, and I'll give you £100,000 at the end of the term. Now, essentially, you're banking on the house price rising 20,000 in 7 years, but you also have the potential benefit of cash flowing all the way up until then for 7 years. Now, this would save Bruno from an instant £30,000 loss, and it would also save him from monthly bills for 7 years whilst he and his lady friend enjoy their life in that new home. He is also better off each month, and he knows in 7 years he's potentially getting exactly what he wanted now in terms of his cost, whilst having an easier time up until then without the mortgage. You, on the other hand, will cash flow in the interim, and then if prices rise to where you want, and who knows, they could even go higher, you could buy it, exercising your right via the option to buy it. Now, if it goes up, fantastic, you've got instant equity, but let's just say, for example, it's only worth £100,000 in 7 years. You've still made money for the last 7 years off a property you haven't had to go out and pay for. And very quickly, just remember here, in terms of the bills, you're liable for the council tax, energy bills, mortgages, and insurances, etc. as you're essentially taking sole ownership and control of the property. Hopefully that little exercise I just ran off the top of my head kind of makes some sense to you all. But this is how lease options essentially work. And remember, one of the key things I will keep stressing throughout this video is you need legal agreements drawn out. And this is essentially what we did for a project I'm so excited to share with you on this channel over the next few weeks, maybe months, depending on when we get started. And just before we close, I got some really important pointers for you all, and I think I should just mention them again. But remember, this is just my perspective, so take it as you will. The first is, don't take advantage of people. If you can see someone genuinely struggling, if you do this right, you can make it a win-win for both sides. Don't just take advantage of the situation. Yes, you may be able to get an extra £5,000–10,000 profit, but I believe that if you do that at the expense of somebody else's livelihood, that's just wrong. That's just unethically wrong. But if you can sleep at night doing that, then by all means go for it. But it's not something I do. The second is, don't put large deposits down. Unless you're 100% comfortable, you can get those returns back within the desired time frame that you have. For example, if you put down £1,000 deposit and you turn it into a HMO, for example, and you know that after all the bills, etc., mortgages, you're making £250, and you're happy to make £250 back every month for the next 4 months to get your £1,000 back, and you're happy with that return on investment, that's fine. But otherwise, don't just throw lumpy deposits in just to get yourself an option agreement. And the third is to ensure that everything is done legally. Now, you may want to Google the best solicitors for this and really have all your concerns or potential risk factors explained. For example, maybe the vendor may want to try and change their mind after 6 months or 8 months, for example. You need to have all this written up, not only to protect yourself, but also to protect them as well. And the fourth one, which I believe, in my opinion, is the most important before we close this video, is for you to make sure that you smash the like button if you haven't already. So with that, I'm going to kind of roll the bloopers, but I just remembered I completely missed something, so I better explain that now as well. One of the great things with the lease option is, if you don't choose to buy it, for example, which is absolutely fine, you can potentially package it on. So you have that option to buy at, say, £100,000 off Bruno. You could potentially find somebody else who may want that property, maybe sell it for, I don't know, 105, 110,000, and you can potentially make something off the top. So it's also a great skill set to have if deal sourcing is your kind of thing. It's just something really useful to know. Now, again, I'm not an expert in lease options, but it is something we've done on the project that I'm very, very excited to share with you all. I kind of had a backseat in that. I raised a bit of finance for it, but I'm part of it. So I will try and explain that in as much detail in a future video. So now I'm going to roll those bloopers. I thank you all for sticking around with me today. And I think I was going to say something, but I can't remember. Have a great day, guys. Negotiate. If you wish. With an agreement. Just stop it at an agreement in place. Sorry, mate. What am I even saying? Flesh a little bit. Oh man, what am I even saying? Yeah. Done, babe.